Hi, I'm Robert Cervero from the University of California at Berkeley, and today I'm going to give a talk titled Transforming Cities with Transit. I have to say I'm presenting this from Midtown Manhattan, so you might occasionally hear traffic in the background, but I think that's really appropriate given the nature of my subject matter. Cities are becoming much more motorized worldwide. This is being driven by rapid increase in income, sprawl, more people moving the cities, creating longer distance trips, and all of this is giving rise to astronomical increases in auto ownership patterns. Take a place like China, which is adding some 15,000 cars to the streets every day in Chinese cities. They're projected by 2050 to have as many automobiles as currently exist on all of planet Earth, some 800 million cars. Many very rapidly growing but lower income countries like Vietnam, the growth is not so much private cars, but two-wheel scooters, motorcycles. There you have 5 times as many motorcycles as private cars. So suffice to say, cities are becoming much more motorized, creating tremendous challenges. I and others have done a fair amount of work on the effects of these trends of rapid increases in cars and urban sprawl. A place like China, for instance, which I've studied on and off over the years, we did a recent analysis where we showed that people that moved from the historical centers of the city, compact mixed-use development with great bicycle infrastructure, good walking environments, organically evolved communities, and moved to the suburbs, some voluntarily, some were displaced, often moved to these master plan, gated, isolated residential towers separated from many urban activities, dramatic increases in vehicle kilometers traveled per person. In the case of the study we did of Shanghai, 275% increase in VKT per person. We used vehicle kilometers traveled per person as a metric to sustainability in the transport sector. As it increases, so do tailpipe emissions, so does energy consumption, so does the use of land. Car-dependent cities we know carry with them very high cost. The car is a wonderful invention. It's provided unprecedented levels of mobility. It allows people to get around on demand, any and everywhere at all times of the day. But we know that the cumulative cost of a car-oriented lifestyle begins to catch up with you. Air pollution, both local and global, global being greenhouse gas emissions, but also local. This one image shows Sao Paulo. They have 3,500 deaths per year because of asthma, bronchitis, upper respiratory illnesses, most of these associated with the massive growth in cars. Social exclusion, if you don't have a car, you're isolated from the many opportunities for a job, for education, and so forth. Neighborhood disruption, freeways and major transport infrastructures can uproot neighborhoods. But mounting congestion, I think, is one of the key costs that we associate with a car-oriented lifestyle. Congestion becomes a drag on economic development, but also it rapidly deteriorates quality of life. We find that people who spend time in congestion become less involved in community affairs because they spend so much time trying to get about the city, there's less quality of time left to spend with their family, neighborhood, and loved ones, what some people refer to as time pollution. Another thing we well know is you can't build yourself out of this traffic congestion. Many studies we've done, particularly of the developed world, show that very quickly the added road capacity you provide gets consumed. People change mode of travel, time of day of travel, route, so that within a couple of years you're back to as congested as you were at the very beginning. So supply side solutions in and of themselves are not enough. This has led to really a movement, what has been referred to as the ASSI movement, avoid, shift, and improve. We need to avoid more trips by better transport and land use integration, creating shorter trips where people have to use motorized cars less often. Invest very heavily in sustainable modes like bicycle, pedestrian, and public transport. And to the degree people do use mechanized, motorized forms of transport like buses, hopefully they're doing it in clean fuels. Diesel electric hybrid buses or using compressed natural gas. The image here, I think, says volumes about why we need to be promoting public transport. It's inherently the most sustainable form of mobility. You make far less use of scarce resources like urban space per person traveled than virtually any other mode. It's very important, though, that any investment in transportation, including public transportation, be carefully integrated with urban land use planning. It's pretty axiomatic, but it's so true that we don't hop into vehicles, trains, cars, or buses to be moving. We're going to places, and it's places that matter most. It's what we value and care most about cities. It's places of work, places of residence, places of shopping, places of learning, places of worship. It's really what we care for first and foremost about cities, and not the process of necessarily getting to these places. So cities that have understood that had a fairly well articulated vision of how they wanted to grow, such as Copenhagen in Denmark. They started in the late 1950s with a master plan called the Finger Plan, and they identified 5 well-defined linear corridors where growth would occur. They also importantly identified the green wedges where they would protect land from development, natural ecological preserves, open space, water reshed areas, and so forth. They proceeded to invest in advance of demand in rail transit to channel and guide the growth along these well-defined corridors, and urbanization very quickly followed. These happen to be a few images of compact mixed-use development around some of the train stations in Copenhagen. But you can find virtually every example worldwide of cities that have good sustainable transportation system. They got it right. They understood you had to first have a clear vision and a plan in place of how you wanted to grow, and then they used investment in public transport and other infrastructure to help achieve that desired urban form. Now in the case of Copenhagen, it wasn't just good regional planning. They also at the micro scale invested very heavily in bicycle infrastructure, cycle tracks, bicycle parking, protected zones at transit stops. So you find 35% or so of all trips, even on days of the year when it's rainy, are by public transit, and a very high share of access trips to transit stations are bikes. We call this Copenhagen-style form of development compact, mixed-use, walking-friendly development around transit stations. We call that transit-oriented development, or TOD. The image here of Pleasant Hill, California, the Bay Area Rapid Transit System in the San Francisco Bay Area where I'm from, I've studied this station for a number of years now. We show that people who live there are taking transit 5 to 7 times as much as people in the surrounding immediate community. And a good part of this is because what we call self-selection. For lifestyle reasons, people are sorting themselves into these places, buying fewer cars, taking transportation more often. So it's absolutely essential that we work with these kind of market lifestyle preferences to ensure we're building sufficient, good quality housing opportunities across all income levels to serve this market demand. Now, TOD is more than about creating neighborhoods where people can get on and off of stations. Some of the best TODs are community hubs. They really become the centerpiece for urban regeneration, for building great quality communities. And a big part of this is urban design, soften people's perceptions of density so you can really get density high enough to make sure you have a very sustainable, cost-effective form of transportation. A place like Portland, Oregon, for instance, light rail transit cohabitates the streets very well with pedestrians. So it's what we call placemaking, places where people feel comfortable, where they want to be. An example of a city that has really done this form of TOD, one of the prototypes, if you will, is Vällingby in Stockholm, Sweden, where early on in their planning, the tunnelbana system, they built master plan communities organized around the transit station, and placemaking again was a big emphasis. When you leave the tunnelbana station in Stockholm, you're not hit by tall buildings. What you immediately see actually is a public space, a civic square. This civic square really plays a very important role of placemaking. It's where people concentrate for public celebrations, demonstrations. One day it's a farmer's market, the next day it might be an open air concert, but it really is that community hub. After work, people meet friends, they might socialize and shop or go to a restaurant together. So they're able to couple those trips using transit with other activities near the transit stations and eventually get to home. So you really try to consolidate a lot of activities around the transit hub through good urban design, making these vibrant, viable communities. What I showed in the case of Vällingby was a TOD on a greenfield. Cities like Stockholm, I could show examples in many other parts of the world, are now moving towards TOD on brownfields as part of an urban regeneration process. A good example of this is Hammarby Sjösted, where they took a industrial site, former industrial site, and redeveloped it as a green TOD, invested very significantly in tramway, traffic calming techniques, community gardens, congestion pricing. If you go on the edge of Hammarby Sjösted, they actually have a cordon where if you pass during the peak hour, you have to pay a congestion toll. So it's not just good land use planning, it's also trying to get the economics right, really passing on true charges to motorists, which is part of their success. But Hammarby Sjösted, and I could cite other examples, are what we call green TOD. What they've managed to do is integrate this transit-oriented development with green architecture and green urbanism. Minimal or zero waste through recycling, self-sufficient energy production. They have biofuels and other ways of creating their own energy on site, photovoltaics and so forth. But one of the key things is if you link TOD with this kind of green urbanism, you get a lot of efficiencies. For instance, land that otherwise might be given over to parking, you need less parking because people have fewer cars, is now land that instead can go to parks, community gardens, towards photovoltaic arrays, other kind of activities. And when we've done studies of these kind of green DODs, such as in Hammarby we find that their carbon emissions, their energy consumption is roughly 1/3 less than comparable communities of similar incomes. So we know that this really can deliver significant environmental sustainability benefits if we design it well. I do like to, on this point about transit-oriented development and efficient transport land use integration, I try to make the point that this is not just about placemaking. You can also make money if you do it well. Take a place like Hong Kong, an extremely land-constrained area where there's a tremendous demand for good accessible sites for development. The transit agency there, MTR, leases the air rights above their development, and they make roughly 2/3 of the income of the transit agency comes from value capture, recapturing the value of being near a transit stop. But they've also put a lot of emphasis in recent years on placemaking. Prior to the year 2000, there wasn't a lot of emphasis. It was just putting buildings on top of stations. Now they've enhanced the quality of pedestrian environments, architectural integration, a much better urban milieu. They have found that not only their revenues have gone up, basically 25% increase in profits, but so has their ridership. So sustainable mobility, sustainable finance, I think are wholly consistent ideas based on experiences like Hong Kong. I'm going to close by emphasizing bus rapid transit. BRT is one of the fast-growing areas in terms of trying to promote high-quality, high-capacity public transit, but using a rubber-tire bus-based system. Usually it's a dedicated exclusive right-of-way with many other features such as off-vehicle fare payment, not unlike what you would pay on a metro rail system, but if these systems are designed well, they're at a much cheaper cost. Latin America by far has been the global leader in advancing BRT systems. There are roughly 1/3 vehicle kilometers of BRT systems worldwide you can find in Latin American cities, but some 2/3 of all ridership of the 150 BRT systems worldwide you can find in Latin American cities. This graph might be a little difficult to read, but it really shows the productivity of BRT in Latin American cities. The number of passengers per kilometer of BRT route in Latin American cities is 2.5 times as much as you find in Asian cities and much higher than in North America and Europe. Now, part of this is because they've been very successful at integrating transportation and land use. Curitiba is a world-class example of using bus-based BRT systems, not unlike Copenhagen or Stockholm, to drive growth along well-defined linear corridors. These are compact mixed-use corridors. They used a number of tools such as density bonuses, overlay districts, urban design standards to create good quality urbanism and urban milieus along these transit corridors. If you look at Curitiba versus a unabashedly car-dependent city, a city designed for automobility like Brasilia, the master plan capital of Brazil, you find that it has roughly 3.5 times less vehicle kilometers traveled per person and many more transit trips per year. I'm going to close by taking an example of another Latin American city, Bogota, which actually has built a wonderful BRT system, but it was designed purely from an engineering perspective to move a lot of people, 40,000 people per direction per hour on buses. Very high achievement in terms of ridership, 1.7 million passengers per day, a dual carriageway system so they can move a lot of people up and down this corridor. But because this was an engineering system, the focus was on low cost, cheap right-of-way acquisition, putting in a median of a very busy road, they failed to leverage development. In fact, they put the corridors in some of the more suppressed urban districts in Bogota. It's also very crowded, not a terribly good urban milieu. We did a study recently where we showed there actually was more development turned its back on the BRT corridors, away from the BRT corridors than near it, partly because these were engineering designs, not placemaking designs. A city like Guangzhou, China actually has taken a much different approach where their BRT system has very high passenger carrying capacity, not unlike Bogota, but they've done a much more effective job of blending in the transit stops with the surrounding urban milieu, second-story skywalks, a much more intimate human-scale kind of urban development pattern. I'm going to simply close by Three key points I tried to make in my talk today. One is that vision and planning matters. If we really want to create these inherently sustainable urban development patterns, TOD and so forth, we really have to have good planning in place to leverage private development. It's also important that we seize upon these opportunities and realize that these aren't just mobility investments. We're also creating places. We have to treat these as city shaping investments. They have to be an integral upfront part of the early planning. They can't be an afterthought. And then lastly, I'll make the point that there's tremendous opportunities, particularly in the global south, where the vast majority of future growth is being projected to do bus rapid transit-oriented TOD. In fact, between 2010 and 2030, 90% of urban population growth is projected to be in small to medium-sized cities, 100,000 to 500,000. These are the very places that can't afford expensive metro rail systems, but a bus rapid transit system with TOD type of development is eminently well suited to such places. Thank you.